on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Frank Rich. He is a writer at large, of course, has written a piece in the New York Magazine, Donald Trump is Saving Our Democracy, and also EP of literally one of the few comedies I watch anymore on television, VEEP. Welcome to the program, Frank.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get into this, because I have been looking for these type of pieces, and I don't want to jump. I want to obviously, but I want to know by the end of this when we're going to get to the point where other people in the media understand at least part of what you're saying here in terms of Donald Trump. Maybe hope springs eternal. But before we get there, let's talk about a little bit about the different sort of excuses that the press is making for the rise of Donald Trump. Because it's fascinating to me. There's this compulsion.
Yes, I mean, look, from the first when he began, it was considered to be an utter joke, and many people thought he wouldn't even announce or disclose, if he did in fact disclose, his financials and all the rest of it. So it was that he was a celebrity because he was on The Apprentice for however many years, or it was that he was like Bernie Sanders, when he's in fact nothing like Bernie Sanders, who's been in Washington for almost a quarter century and has a consistent ideology, which Trump doesn't have. Then he was like Huey Long, or he was like Father Coughlin, but he's not like them either. Then it was the American people are just idiots, seem to be the feeling. They'll go for anyone who entertains them. Then there was an excuse by some on the right, like George Will and Charles Krauthammer, the conservative columnist. He wasn't actually a Republican. He was a fake Republican, as if Republicans didn't share his views about immigration, the birther conspiracy theories about Obama, and all the rest of it. So, and then a lot of liberal pundits sort of took the attitude, I'm embarrassed I'm even writing about this. I should be writing about, I don't know what Marco Rubio thinks about foreign policy, and excuse me for trying to explain this, this little turd that has sort of appeared in the political scene.
I mean, let's take that last one, because when Huffington Post made that decision to sort of sequester Trump in the entertainment section, what I found offensive about it, and I'm obviously coming from a specific ideological perspective, mm-hmm. But what I found offensive about it was that if you're going to put him there, there's really little reason not to put the rest of them there. And I agree. His ascendancy, I mean, we've already seen this guy has basically knocked Scott Walker out of the race, it seems to me.
Right, and I would argue that he's perilously close to knocking Jeb Bush out. I mean, Jeb Bush, who was the establishment candidate, has all the money in the organization. I guess maybe he can buy his way back in, but there are new polls overnight that show, even as Trump's lead has fallen a bit, Bush has gotten absolutely no traction. He's third or fourth in every poll. He's barely around 10%, if that. And so and so this idea that he's entertainment and that he's sucking the air out of the coverage for all these other brilliant candidates is ridiculous. Indeed, I argue in the piece, the real entertainers, in a way, are the candidates who just stick to a script and use scripted lines all the time. They're more play acting than Trump is. When you have, Hillary Clinton, as reported on the front page of the Times, and happily given out by her campaign to the Times, that she is going to now script in humor and accountability about the emails and being human, because focus groups have basically told her to do that. That's more the creation of, say, a network television executive than someone like Trump, who rides off the rails and doesn't do what he says, outrageous as much of it is, based on focus groups.
Right. I mean, my perspective is that they all are. They're all just approaching marketing from a different perspective, and his is maybe a little bit less scripted. But I mean, he knows the parameters of his character. He just decides to do a little more improv, I guess. And
yes.
And so, but let's talk. You mentioned in the piece attending a talk by two American historians, Brinkley and I can't remember the.
It's David Blight of Yale, the author of A Race and Reunion, and Alan Brinkley, who wrote Voices of Protest, which is sort of the definitive book about Huey Long and Father Coughlin and their sort of populist demagoguery in the during the Depression. They were both. I didn't attend the meet. They were both in a Politico magazine seminar that was published, and they both said there's no precedent for Trump. Brinkley said there's nothing like Coughlin and Huey Long. For one thing, Trump has no ideology except that everything he says is right. That's his only ideology. His ideology is the ideology of Donald Trump. And David Blight made the point that really hit home with me, which is he's more like a fictional character. He's like a rogue or a confidence man out of a Mark Twain book, like The Gilded Age. And I think that's absolutely true. He's sort of his prototype is in fiction, and particularly I struck by his resemblances to fictional presidential candidates or presidents in the whole spate of comedies that have grown up since Watergate and Vietnam basically sapped American confidence in Washington. So films like Bulworth, in which Warren Beatty plays a California senator who insults his own contributors and it breaks up a presidential debate and immediately becomes more successful as a result. Or Nashville, the great Robert Altman movie, which has a candidate you never even meet saying preposterous things but stirring everyone up. Bob Roberts, the Tim Robbins movie, sort of a mockumentary 20 or so years ago about a right-wing folk singer who had made a killing in finance, who runs as sort of, as someone calls him, a crypto-fascist clown, and finds people charmed by him. That's what Trump resembles. As I write in the piece, it's as if the Hollywood leading man that Jeff Daniels played in Woody Allen's Purple Rose of Cairo leapt out of the screen. Right. He's like one of these characters leaping out of the screen into the real life of politics.
And I should also say, you mentioned you cite The Magic Christian by Terry Southern, which it's been years since I read that book, but I can't recommend that highly enough.
It's a great book, and I hadn't read it in years either, and I pulled it out and read it. And by the way, I say to your listeners, don't see the movie version, which they bought the title. There was a movie made with Ringo Starr. It has almost nothing to do with the book. Find Terry Southern's book. It's in print, published in 1959, and the premise of it is that a billionaire named Guy Grant decides to use his money for incredible pranks that embarrass almost every institution in America. And one example that I cite in the piece is he gives $1 million in secrecy to an actor of a live network medical drama in prime time, and to the actor playing a wise old physician who's doing surgery, and in the middle of the surgery, the guy says to the actor says to the national audience, "I can't stand this drivel anymore. If I have to say any more of it, I'm going to vomit into the incision I just made in this patient." And everyone's outraged, and the FCC is outraged, the network is outraged, but then the critics are outraged, and then they discover, wait a minute, ratings are going up. We like this.
Now, and on some level, that is basically I think that's why you get 24, 25 million viewers for these debates, because everybody's just waiting to see what Trump is going to say next on some level. But
absolutely. Now, and by the way, one of the funny things in The Magic Christian, and there's so many great things, but in that particular incident, once the network figures out people like it, they start trying to create their own, off the book wild incidents with the actors, But of course, the public doesn't buy it because only the original stunt could do it authentically, bring it off authentically.
But here's the thing about Trump's sort of popularity. I mean, the popularity, I think, like the enjoyment, I would imagine there were far more people less interested in the sort of the dynamics of the Republican race tuning into that debate than there were people who were just interested in the dynamics of the actual just sort of debate as an entertainment value. But the popularity of Trump, it seems to me, I mean, just if we take the polls as any indication, is firmly embedded in the base of the Republican Party. Now, it may not go past whatever it's, the high point has been 32% of likely Republican primary voters. Nevertheless, that's a huge chunk, and it's certainly the only candidate that the base has coalesced around. We compare this to 2012 polling. It's really sort of stunning. I mean, you've got Mitt Romney, who throughout almost the 2 years prior to the election just basically stays in double digits, and there are other people who go up and down, relative to that. But this is a very different dynamic. So I guess my point is, like, when a guy like Brinkley says that Trump's ideology is everything he says is right. I mean, is there a bigger, deeper story that on some level, for at least the base of the Republican Party, that has also become their ideology?
Maybe so. That combined with the nativist and bigoted elements of what he says. I mean, the fact is that his wanting to, deport illegal immigrants en masse basically was Romney's position in 2008 and a version of it in 2012. His misogyny is part of the Republican brand. Indeed, one thing that people, when Megyn Kelly called Trump out in the Fox News debate for calling women pigs and so forth, and everyone, Republicans said, I'm glad she did it, and I'm with Megyn Kelly, and he then insulted Megyn Kelly. The fact is, when she did, his retort was, well, all of this does apply to Rosie O'Donnell, and what did the huge Republican audience in the arena do? They cheered and applauded.
Exactly.
And so that shows what they really think, even if they're paying lip service to agreeing with Megyn Kelly. So yes, I think some of this is deeply embedded in the base. And to get back to the different dynamic you were talking about, Sam, there have been polls, the two new polls in the past day or so. They're almost identical in the results. They show Trump at 25 or 26 with Carson 7 or 8 points behind, and then Fiorina behind him. But if you add up those three candidates, it's over 50% in both polls. So you have a Republican electorate that is saying, we want one of these people who are all fairly extreme, all outsiders, over any of these supposedly wonderful Rubios and Bushes and other people that the party establishment has given us. That is, as you say, that is a completely different dynamic from the Romney race in 2012.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, we had Rick Perry ascendant at one point, Newt Gingrich. I mean, Herman Cain, I guess it would be considered an outsider. But I mean, it seems to me, to a certain extent, I don't want to belabor this too much, but saying, a guy, specifically a guy who believes everything he says is right, who is also a businessman, right? Because we've been told by the Republican Party for quite some time that, George Bush is going to be the CEO president. Mitt Romney would have been the CEO president. Now we literally have who's a bigger CEO than the CEO who's a billionaire.
Right.
That man is right is also sort of seems to me that a central tenet of nativism. I mean, you can't be nativist, it seems to me, if you don't perceive that you are always right, because the other then becomes what is wrong. And I guess building on that, the notion of the Fiorina and Carson as outsiders, do you think it's the fact that they're outsiders, or is it that their future is not necessarily or I should say this, that for Carson and Fiorina, they are unbound by the constraints that a typical white Republican politician would have, someone who wants to sort of maintain the party, because she can say things about women, Carson can say things about black people in a way that, a guy like Jeb Bush couldn't, for instance. Or,
well, I think that's right. They have no loyalty to the party or the old ideas of the party establishment. I think that's exactly right.
And so they're freed up. So it's less that they're outside of Washington, because they all seem to run against Washington, in my mind.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, I guess, what does this say about where the Republican Party has gone?
Well, I think the Republican Party, and I'm going to have to be brief because I have to go to a non-political event in my life in a couple of minutes. But I think the Republican Party is really does not have a core. It is a bunch of billionaires, don't you think? Sugar daddies running these super PACs. Sheldon Adelson, the Koch brothers, whoever it is on a given day. They've taken over the party. They have their own particular agendas, their own particular candidates. So it's like a bunch of fiefdoms in medieval Europe. There's no there, and the party brand is very bad. And there's a possibility they're going to shut down the government again imminently over Planned Parenthood. And so they're really, there's no one in charge. And look at Reince Priebus, the nominal head of the Republican National Committee. He came crawling to Trump Tower to get him to sign a worthless, non-binding pledge that he would not run as a third-party candidate. That, to me, says it all about the state of the Republican Party.
All right. Lastly, I know you have to go, and I appreciate your time.
No, sure. Thank you.
Do you think there will be a point where we get the mainstream and conventional political press to understand that this is a story more about the Republicans than it is Donald Trump?
I hope so, but old habits die hard, and so far as you and I have both agree and have seen, it's not impressive. How many columns have we read that begin, well, Trump aside, let's talk about the real candidates in the Republican race. Right. Let's compare them on foreign policy, or let's compare them on immigration or whatever. It's as if the elephant in the room, they see it, but it doesn't matter. It's like, like a cloud passing over this pristine, civic-minded party. So the whole orientation is so wrong. I don't know. We're not seeing it yet. I hope we do, for the sake of people understanding what's going on better.
Indeed. Frank Rich, thank you so much for your time today. We will link, of course, to your piece in New York Magazine.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.